This week on SDL, Russ and I are in Russia. And I don't know what that is behind me, but it's interesting looking, so we decided we would shoot the intro right here. We're going to talk about cyber warfare in the modern age on this episode of Secure Digital Life.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life.
If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So, Top can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man. Oof.
In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. Be like you're looking out through the HAL dot, you know, like,
oh,
hey Dave.
It's like Sims, but with, you know,
it would be like Sims
instead of AI. It's only.
Accredited by Microsoft, Cisco, NetApp, IDLE, Oracle, and EC Council, QuickStart delivers high-impact, low-cost IT training through its cognitive learning platform in multiple domains. With QuickStart, you get an ever-growing catalog of courses, self-paced courses offered through a monthly subscription, virtual classrooms offered through an annual subscription, peer-to-peer learning, mentoring, official courses, certified instructors, hands-on labs, and more. For more information, visit www.quickstart.com. Use coupon code PAUL20 to get 20% off on all cybersecurity courses. QuickStart, creating world-class technologists.
Join us April 1st to 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Visit https:// all that stuff, infosecworld.misty.com, and use the registration code. Okay, now I have to do these, Oscar Sierra 19er-Sierra Echo Charlie Whiskey Echo Echo Kilo for 15% off the main conference or a World Pass. If you haven't been to InfoSec World before, you should probably go. It's lots of fun. If while you are at InfoSec World, you're interested in booking an interview or a briefing with Security Weekly, please go to securityweekly.com/conference request and submit your request. All those links are in the show notes, so you can get them there if you so desire. Registration is now open for the first Security Weekly webcast of 2019. You can register for our Rise Above complex workflows, practical ways to accelerate incident response webcast now by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. All right, and I don't think Henry Rollins will be joining us for the Rise Above webcast, but he might be suing us for the Rise Above.
Should take a breath before we continue.
Really?
Well, because that was a lot to say.
There was a lot to say. Yeah, there's all kinds of ads. Yeah. So we're in Russia. Really, we are, and we're just like hanging. You should turn the camera.
Check it out.
Yeah. So this is the background.
This is from the view from the window.
That's what you can see out the window. So
if you look in the back, you can see some nuclear power plant.
Yeah, we don't know what all that stuff is, but we're gonna walk down there later and see if we can get arrested. If we don't get arrested before the show is over.
Yeah, right.
One of the things we're going to talk about today in Russia was about the modern age and defense. And countries love to spy on each other. They've been doing it since as long as there have been any, probably just people. When the cave people were like, hey, what are they doing over there? Mm-hmm. I mean, I could see that, right?
I can see it too. Yeah.
It's like, what's he doing with those rocks? Go over there and see. Yes, go see what he's doing with those rocks, Bill. Come on, go over there. And there's a lot of cave people named Bill. There was a common,
Bilbo.
It's not very well known, but there was a lot of cave people named Bill. It was one of the more common Neanderthal names. But regardless of all that, it's really gotten to a point with the modern age of being really, really easy to do in terms of spying, because if you think about spying 100 years ago, the Civil War was full of spies. There was this big deal about spying, but it was all physical stuff. It would mean somebody literally goes to some place and they live there and they pretend to be something they're not, and they're taking a huge risk. Whereas today, you can do all kinds of spying without actually going there at all. So you can just literally sit back. And if you think about it, up until just about 10 years ago, nations, cities, states, counties, and whatever, they had no cyber hygiene. I mean, there was no such thing as cyber hygiene. I never heard the term, and I haven't heard that term until just recently. So basically, in the modern age, spying was a very, very easy thing to do. I mean, would you agree with that?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, you've got things, you don't even, like you said, you don't even have to be there with a majority of communications occurring over, e-methods, right? It's very simple to use, tools of the trade to hack in or to surveil, whether it's internationally or domestically. So I mean, it's very easy.
I mean, we could sit right here in this hotel, which is in another country. So now we're in Russia. We could sit here in this hotel and attack Vietnam or the U.S. and it's very easy, and we don't have to go there at all. We don't even have to take any great risk because we can go to a place that's very friendly to us. And we can sit right there at home. We can sit at home, which would be a lot safer, and do all kinds of attacks and spying or whatever without ever leaving the comfort of our living room, even though we did. So we flew all the way over here. So we're not doing any spying. So it's no spying. We're just looking out the window. So if you're out in the parking lot right now doing something, like
put that laser microphone away.
Well, I was just seeing what those people were doing in the back of that car down there. The one with the windows.
Oh, if this car is a rockin'.
Exactly. So I was going to break this down into three things then today to talk about warfare, intellectual property, and chaos. All those things are different kinds of, we're not really talking about spying like, oh, I'm trying to watch what you're doing. It's just more about like, how does this stuff work in the context of cyber warfare? So if we were really trying to do this, and most of these nation states would probably think about all these things for some kind of attack. I mean, I think most nation states now, at least in the first world kind of countries, are starting to really be aware of this stuff. And I mean, of course, I think every country is starting to be aware of this kind of stuff. Now, in 1941, just 700 kilometers north of here is the city of Leningrad, which was, and I called it Leningrad, it's called St. Petersburg now, but it was called Leningrad in 1941. And the Nazis besieged it. And for 4 years, this was a state of warfare up on the Gulf of Finland. Until 1944, the Germans finally withdrew from the siege of Leningrad. They just surrounded the city and they cut it off, and everybody was trapped in there. And it was just totally physical thing. I mean, there was no, there were mechanical things there, but there was no digital component to it. So it was, people were cut off in the city of St. Petersburg for years, and all these troops were outside the city, and it was just this horrible thing. But I mean, basically, that was a different kind of war. I mean, than what I think you would see today if we're talking about warfare. I mean, one of the things that I would mention today is in World War II, if you wanted to surveil the city, you might have flown an airplane over the city. But that airplane had no digital components. It had rudimentary communication systems, so a radio. I mean, at best, and a lot of them didn't even have radios, and they had very little range, and it was this analog radio signal. But today, we could literally, if we wanted to surveil St. Petersburg from right here, or from the United States, or from South America, we could fly a drone if we had one. I mean, Russ has drones. He doesn't have them with him, so before anybody needs to come break the door down, he doesn't have a drone, and no, there's nobody off camera with a rifle or anything. He has drones at home where they're safe and legal, but we could fly a drone over St. Petersburg and do massive amounts of surveillance on that city without ever coming anywhere near.
Well, you don't even need drones anymore. Now you've got satellites.
Well, we have satellites, but I mean, if you want low-level stuff, or you want to literally fly inside of a building or something, I mean, you've got those big Air Force drones that you can fly all over the world that are controlled by satellite. You've got little small, and we could get a car and drive up there and sit miles outside the city and fly our little small drones. I mean, we can launch a drone out of the hotel room here and go say, what is that? The stuff you saw off in the distance. I want to go check it out. And you could fly it. I don't know what the law is here. I would be a little nervous about you launching your drones out the hotel room.
That's what
but at the same time, we see that all the time going on at airports and everything else where they're causing problems and so forth. And we could literally control that drone. Now, I mean, you can expand that idea when you start talking about warfare. In the siege of Leningrad, today we could say you have a drone that's launching Hellfire missiles. I mean, the Air Force has those. They use them all the time. They take one off from some military base in West Germany and fly it up here at 40,000 feet, and then the thing can come in and launch weapons and do recon and whatever else you want it to do. So it's really different kind of thing, from even just small scale cheap stuff. And then Metalhead. I mentioned Metalhead because I was thinking about warfare, and I don't think you can think about warfare anymore unless you think about Metalhead. I mean, if you haven't watched Black Mirror, go watch Black Mirror.
It's a freaky episode too. I mean, you think about drones as like quadcopters or hexcopters, but in this particular episode of Black Mirror, it's a dog. I mean,
and it's tiny. It looks like those things they were building in Boston.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you've
General Dynamics or Boston Dynamics.
Yeah, you've seen those robots they build. They look just like those Metalhead things, and these were just security. Yeah. If you haven't watched Black Mirror, I don't know where you've been for the last 2 years, but whatever. Yeah. But the Black Mirror episode called Metalhead is about these people, and they're sort of scavenging, and they go in this warehouse, and oops, they trip this security system, which is these like robots that come chasing after them. But I was thinking, you could besiege a city physically with hundreds of those things that just stand in a row and say, try and get out. We're just going to stand here, and if you try to get out, we're going to come right after you, and you're going to have a big problem with that. So if you surrounded the city of St. Petersburg with Metalhead robots, you'd have a big problem. And cyber war could also then mean just compromising all the devices. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you just now sit down and say, okay, within, say, a 1 mile radius of where we're sitting, how many devices are there that affect the way things work or that could represent real warfare items? If we were besieging this area around this hotel, what devices would we want to compromise first, and what would that do to us?
Well, even in the modern media, we've seen recently, where the American government has chastised like Huawei for, some type of surveillance being happened where the location data from these particular devices, they were mobile devices, were being reported back to some server in China. So now Huawei's suing the federal government. And then there was another incident where the American government, the military specifically, prohibited the sale or use of DJI drones in the government because of a similar thing. Now, whether or not that was happening or not, or if they were just fear mongering, I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that. But the fact that fear existed,
right? And then I think if you also start talking about warfare in the sense of what if your metalheads are running off of Windows NT 4.0. And that it seems ridiculous, but the truth is that when you look at things, you see this sort of stuff. I mean, all of us see this stuff all the time. You go to the airport and you see, oh, here's a ticketing system that's crashed, and it's sitting there, and you're going, oh, wow, look at that. That's Windows
98.
That's Windows 98. I mean, you see it all the time, and you wonder, when you start thinking about military equipment and how long it takes them to spec stuff out, I wonder how much of that kind of stuff exists. And we're not just talking about the United States or Russia or anybody else, it's just in general. But I mean, if you start thinking about military hardware, what if those drones are running on Windows 98 and you can find a way to crash them? I think that's what that battlefield starts to look like then. So it starts to look like there's a game called Othello.
Oh, yeah.
And if you've never seen the game of Othello, it's I don't know, it's vaguely based on Go.
On Go, yeah.
But it's not really like really, Go. No. It's like you put one white,
black and white,
and you create a row of white things. All the pellets in between flip over, and so I think that's what that sort of modern battlefield could start to look like. Is it's like we got tanks and you got tanks, and I'm trying to take over your tanks and you're trying to take over my tanks. And maybe it eventually just sort of expands to where there's not any tanks at all. It's like capture the flag now. Yeah. So it's just like who's in charge? How do we get control of the most systems? Who's in charge of the most systems? And how do we use them? I mean, there's another issue of this too, is about exploits. Like we saw, like Eternal Blue. Yeah. Like when the NSA exploit Eternal Blue was released, it becomes ineffective. And there's always been this whole thing about when do you use the things that you know.
Yeah.
Famous, so as long as we're talking about World War II, famous incidents from World War II were like the Purple Code from Japan. We compromised it, but we didn't want them to know we compromised it. So if every time they plan an action we do something, they're going to know they're going to change the code. Yeah. So what happens is that people kind of back up from that and they go, well, we're only going to do a little bit. And that's, this course turns into this whole, like, we can have a whole course in ethics and spend all day talking about the ethics of whether or not you do that. And in fact, speaking of ethics, one of the other things that came to mind out of this when I was thinking about warfare was A Taste of Armageddon, which is a very old Star Trek episode from I think it was the second season of the original Star Trek. Now back with Bill and Leonard Nimoy and all those guys, but back in the original TV show in the '60s.
very famous episode I liked that was called A Taste of Armageddon. And now, instead of actually people fighting in a war, they just use computers to predict the outcome. And when they determine that you've been killed, you have to go get disintegrated. And so the whole crew of the Enterprise, there's a balloon floating by. I saw something floating towards us. I was like, it's a drone! Oh God, run! But it's just a balloon. Oof. 99 Luftballons.
It's just hovering outside the window too. That's not good.
It's a balloon. It's a drone balloon. If we suddenly disappear in a burst of like red mist, you'll know what happened. It was the 99 Luftballons. If you don't know.
99 Luftballons.
Yeah, that was There's a translated version of the song, which it's called 99 Red Balloons because in German it's Luftballon means balloon, so they had to get that other syllable in there. So she just changed it to 99 Red Balloons. And because I saw somebody asking like once on a thing about why are they red balloons? What does it symbolize? And Nina was like, well, you see, I needed a syllable, so they could have been any color. So it was just kind of, but anyway, on A Taste of Armageddon, the Enterprise crew. I'm sorry, that balloon's really distracting me because now there's another one. Is that the same one or is it a different one?
Way the heck down there.
The balloon.
Oh, look at the pretty balloon.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Taste of Armageddon.
If you see the red laser dot on my forehead, and I'm at. Where was it? I was somewhere the other day where there was a red laser dot on me. What was that? It was this. I can't say where it was, but I was at a client site and there was a red laser dot on my head. It turned out it was a point. No, it was a pointer. One of the people had a pointer in his briefcase, and he was pushing on it. And one of the people was like, "There's a laser dot on you," and I was like, "Oh my God!" And I like stepped away from the window. I was like, "That's frightening," but it was nothing. It was just us all being overly trapped. But anyway, in that episode, the crew of the Enterprise ends up getting determined to be killed because this civilization had gone beyond the boundaries of like old traditional warfare, and it was like, why not just use it like we can predict the outcome of a game? So I think there's a lot of change in what warfare would be like since the days of the siege of Leningrad in 1941, which basically just involved lots of people standing around with rifles on one side and standing around hungry on the other side and hoping they didn't starve to death, and the other side hoping they did starve to death, and it was just kind of this like horrific physical analog kind of thing. Today, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think all the nation states are spending a lot of time on trying to develop just thought streams about what warfare looks like now, because we're all caught in the middle.
Yeah.
I mean, all of you probably run into this all the time, where you're talking to people about various things and they don't understand the technological components of it, because a lot of leaders are from another era, and you're just slowly seeing that start to transition. Like we have a great congressman in Rhode Island, Congressman Jim Langevin, who's very forward thinking about all this and really tries to stay on top of it. But I don't know about your elected representatives. They may be people that are 98 years old and have been sitting in Washington since, the end of the Civil War. There are some of those, and they may not be quite up on it, and maybe don't even care. So, but I think all our countries are spending a lot of time on this in discussing what does this stuff look like today compared to what it looked like in 1941. So that was sort of my warfare piece. I think another piece of this is intellectual property. I think that since Bill the Caveman and Tom the Caveman were trying to see what Bill was doing, and there was more than one Bill. I think that we've needed intel. So intelligence gathering and intellectual property has been something, and I'm kind of lumping those together in the sense that intellectual property means information, it means material, it means plans, it means whatever you happen to have. And I think everybody's been trying to gather intel. And again, in the Siege of Leningrad, intel was valuable. Knowing where there were places you could sneak out and get things. We're still watching for the balloons, but I don't see them anymore. But I mean, I think being able to, I just have to make sure that the thing hits upward. That's in our contract, but he goes.
Yeah, I go first. I'm a co-host.
I just grab him and pull him in front of me as I back out of the room.
Yeah, that's great.
Because it's one of those hero movie things, right? An action movie thing. So I'm holding up the body in front of me to soak up the blood. Yeah. But I mean, I think intellectual property is a big deal now in terms of intelligence. Knowing the fact that all those drones that are flying outside our window are running on Windows 98 is an incredible piece of intel that would really be valuable to a military entity or a spying entity. and saying, yeah, those are not balloons. I mean, just knowing that and saying that's not a balloon, that's
it's a space station.
It's a Wi-Fi seeking drone that floats around the city looking for people that are using Wi-Fi illegally. Or I mean, I think it's actually a balloon. But,
yeah, I think so.
But the idea of that and that piece of intel would be really, really valuable. So somebody who could report on something like that would be useful. And I mean, and we've always had those people. We still do. I'm sure both sides have people that are sitting here in these cities just watching what's going on. And I know that the State Department has people reading newspapers from here and saying what was in the news yesterday. Was there reports of violence and was there reports of chaos, or was everything normal, and just writing up little reports on that kind of stuff.
Is sarin gas lighter than air?
Oh, that's bad. There's also R&D.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's developing things. So whether it's a train or it's a car or it's an airplane or it's a remote control balloon that's floating around outside of hotel windows, I mean, if you can build a better Trabant, which is a famous East German car. If you've never seen a Trabant, they were notorious East German vehicles that were like really, really cheap and had 2-cylinder engines or something like that. Or a Lada. A Lada's a really famous Russian car. I've not seen any Ladas here, which is sad because you saw those in Europe and they were really cool. But I mean, if you can take the plans for that, if you could steal the plans for that, if you can acquire that information, then suddenly you have a piece of valuable stuff. Whether it's tank plans or balloon plans or Lada plans, all those things are valuable components and designs that you could use, and they can also then turn into valuable intel for warfare. So Stuxnet is my example of that. If you don't know what Stuxnet was, the belief is that the United States and the Israelis developed the Stuxnet virus. It was based on intel, because if you didn't have the intel, you didn't know how it was put together, you couldn't have written the virus in the first place. But the idea of it was to attack a certain very specific piece of equipment that is used in, I think it's gaseous diffusion. Is that what it was?
Maybe, yeah. I'm not.
Well, typically they use centrifuges in the enrichment of uranium, and gaseous diffusion is a centrifuge-based process. And gaseous diffusion relies on these centrifuges to spin these gases, and they enrich the uranium that way.
So it's like SCADA device type thing?
Well, yeah, they would be SCADA. But now the ones in Iran were air-gapped, so they were not connected to the internet. And so when Stuxnet was enabled, the way that they got the Stuxnet virus delivered was on USBs. So they had to get someone to carry the USB inside. I don't know how they did that. I don't know if they did it by throwing them in the parking lot or what. I mean, that was reputedly
free.
Well, reputedly, those things were happening to the FBI that foreign agents were tossing USB keys in the parking lots and turning all that stuff over to them. But Stuxnet was going to overrun. They exploited the hardware, so the design of the hardware, to make the thing over rev, so that it would overheat and like burn or to be damaged. And so there was an actual, I used to say there was no malware that damaged hardware, because there used to be these rumors that there were viruses that would cause your hard drive to spin until it caught on fire. And I never ever saw one of those things in practice. I mean, I don't think it's even possible with a hard drive. But with these centrifuges, it was possible. And Stuxnet was designed to do just that. And so suddenly this was a form of warfare that relied really heavily on intellectual property, because if you didn't have the information about how these things were manufactured, how they worked, and remember, they were air-gapped. So if you've not ever heard us use the term air-gapped, have we ever used the term air-gapped before?
Just today, as far as I know. As far as I know.
Air-gapped means you unplug it. So if you air-gap something, and it's an actual defense, you can put these in your defensive plans for your networks. I was actually talking in a commercial setting the other day about just that. We were talking about breaking glass procedures, and what do you do when something happens? And I was actually talking about, when do you do this? You have to have a plan. It's just like every other plan. So, but anyway, that kind of intellectual property exploit, I think, is also a key to modern warfare. And it was probably a key to old warfare, because if you could steal the plans for a submarine, that was pretty valuable. I mean, if you had a civil war, and they actually had there was a submarine in the Civil War. Do you know that?
No, I didn't know.
The Confederates had a submarine.
Did they?
Mm-hmm. They sure did, and it sank. It was crazy. It was like it was this gadget, and it went underground, and it was hand cranked by the people on board, and it had a big harpoon on the front of it with a TNT charge, and they would sail a harpoon into the side of a ship from underneath,
wow.
and yeah, it didn't work. It was really bad, and but it was like one of the first examples of submarine warfare. But I mean, think if you have the plans for that, or you have the plans for a ship, you know where the weakness is. If you have the plans for the balloon drone, you know what is a balloon drone capable of? How can I stop it? How can I defend myself against it? And all those things to me start to become sort of the key elements of how do you conduct warfare in a modern age. And again, it comes back to a taste of Armageddon in the sense of, well, maybe it all just turns into this like prediction. So now I'm just going to use a predictive model of warfare and go, okay, here let's just all agree nobody needs to die unless they do. You know that we want to take over France. So we all sit down and we all put our contributions into the algorithm, and the algorithm spits out you won.
But I mean, we're even moving to that in a more physical manner too. Like if you think of classical mechanics transitioning into quantum mechanics, right? Classical mechanics was all about measurable data points, data sets, absolute values. Now, and that's not to be absolute, meaning the absolute positive value, but and as you move into a quantum system, everything becomes about probabilities and outcomes. And it's like it's a 30% probability that the electron is here and it has this energy level. So,
and I mean that's what A Taste of Armageddon was about, which is scary. I mean, it was a really cool, forward-thinking idea from Star Trek, but it was the reality of it was it's not that far off. And I mean, we are at that point where we have such sophisticated techniques that maybe in the next 20 years, suddenly warfare changes to just really two artificially intelligent systems that us poor humans can't even understand.
Neuromancer.
Well, yeah, duking it out. And in some game with counters we don't even understand, just saying, okay, Wintermute and Neuromancer have decided to fight over who controls something that poor humans don't even understand, and they're just arguing about it, and it's like, okay, yeah, we win. Okay, thanks, have a nice day. And of course, the good news about that is we may all just not even notice. It was like, oh yeah, Neuromancer won. Okay, yeah.
The bad news is we don't even exist.
The coloring on the drink machines changed from red to green, so like, oh, I don't taste the same, but who cares? But now, ooh, I don't know. I mean, I think all that stuff is very complicated. Intellectual property becomes then about also bankrupting people. One of the things I remember I said and got some people upset a long time ago, and I'll say it again, was about 9/11. I thought that maybe 9/11 was a more sophisticated plot than just blowing things up. I thought, what if your plan to destroy the United States involved money instead of just, if I blow up this building? And I mean, I know that's short shrift to people that got injured in that, but I mean, in a bigger strategic. So just take the politics or take the personal thing out of it for a second and think about it strategically. If you wanted to cause the United States to bankrupt itself, and now they spend trillions of dollars on military, security, all these things that they've spent trillions of dollars on that they can't afford because they're scared of more attacks. Maybe that's a more sophisticated strategy, and then again, that's this intellectual property idea. If you can discredit, diffuse, extract money from these economies and cause them to just fall apart, then you don't have to fight.
Yeah.
There's no need for the siege of Leningrad if you just sit back and watch it collapse.
Yeah.
I mean, then you can move in after it's all gone. It's like a perfect neutron bomb. You don't need. This is like the Cold War episode, I guess, because we're in Russia. There's no Cold War anymore, although it's snowing. But
well, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but it still
now
looks cold outside. It's the Cold War balloon attack. Another one I had was Chaos, and in the show notes I spelled it KOS in honor of Get Smart, which was a very, very old television program. I know they made some bad movies from it, but
Maxwell Smart.
There was a very Don Adams was in the original show in the '60s. Very clever show. If you've never seen it, it's actually, it was way ahead of its time. There was this huge thing in the '60s because of the Cold War about spies, and there was a lot of television shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Get Smart was another one. In fact, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. starred somebody. We won't say who. You know who was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E.? Was that yeah? That was Bill Cosby was in that.
Was he?
Mm-hmm. Bill Cosby was in the Man. Was he in the Man from Uncle? What was it? Bill Cosby was in one of those shows. There was a bunch of spy shows in the '60s, like television shows.
I'm trying to think about something.
Well, Bill Cosby was in one of them. We don't want to talk about him.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bill. But anyway, chaos was the enemy in Get Smart. But I put chaos in here because, I think as we start talking about warfare, chaos becomes a much more important piece of this. And the fact that we have technology and the technological capability means that chaos is much different than it was before. So my example was if Tyler Durden gets a bunch of waiters to pee in the soup, and if you don't know what that reference, it's
Fight Club.
Fight Club, yeah. And but I mean, the idea of that has always been there. So again, the cavemen were, why don't you go over there in their camp and pee in the soup, And,
how come you didn't use the splicing single frames
of hardcore pornography into family film?
Or if the soap.
I love that movie so much.
It's great.
Anyway, I mean, the idea of that has always been around. So, I mean, in the Civil War, there were agitators. So they sent people. There was a couple of famous incidents in New York City where the Confederates sent some people in there with white phosphorus and they started fires. And during the Civil War, they burned down P.T. Barnum's museum because it was just an act of chaos, and they were trying to make people unhappy about the war. You've seen this over and over and over again. A lot of people's conjectured that in the Vietnam War, a lot of the protesters were being bankrolled by foreign powers. Don't know if it's true or not. Just the idea of it was that it could be. So these provocateurs were being planted and put in there. But today we can do this so much easier. I can do this through social media. I can just jump on social media and you've heard people talk about fake news. It's very difficult to discern between real news and fake news because you don't know what to trust, and you see something like there's a lot of talk right now about anti-vaccine people.
Oh yeah,
and if you're an anti-vaxxer, I don't like you. Please stay away from me. I like my vaccines. I don't enjoy getting smallpox.
What is it, mercury and autism both?
I had every one of those vaccines, and look how I turned out. But I shouldn't do stuff like that. Donald Trump. I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm making fun of myself. But the truth was that that kind of news, I mean, is very easy to spread, and in the context of warfare, it becomes very important because if I can compromise systems that give you information that you need, that's pretty powerful. I mean, if I just want to, for instance, and we're not accusing anybody, we're not saying anything happened because I don't have any evidence. If I want to cause problems during an election, and I jump on social media and I convince people to stay home, I say, oh, there's toxic air. Yeah, we'll use ridiculous, outrageous things just to stay away from any real events. But I mean, if I say today the air in New York City is toxic, you should stay home, I can change the outcome of the election. If enough people believe that and they say, oh, wow, I shouldn't go out today because they're saying on this weather alert to not go out. Even if you just could tell people it's going to, say, come an ice storm. I mean, if you got an election in November, I always wondered why they had elections in November. I'm like, so horrible weather, potentially, storms and snow and ice and rain and all kinds of stuff. Like, why didn't you have elections in, say, like August when school's out? But
maybe it had to do with agrarian society. So
I'm sure it did. It was after. Yeah, you're right. It was after the harvest, right? So that was after. So everybody has nothing to do because the harvest is over. But today,
so let's go vote.
But they show you that elections are changed by weather. Yeah. For instance, a lot of older people won't go out and vote when it's raining, and they say so if it's raining on election day in certain places, the turnout is different. And if half the voters don't go because it's raining, that really changes the outcome of the election. So what if I convince you it's going to happen? I just with social media jump on there and I tell you that it's going to rain or that it's going to be an ice storm or whatever. Add to that now then the idea of exploits in the infrastructure. I mean, if I could cause every stoplight in the city of Boston to turn green tomorrow at noon, or for St. Patrick's Day.
Which, by the way, you can. I mean, the fire and first responders have those remotes that turn the lights.
Is that real?
As far as I know, it is.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I think it is.
I've always heard of it. I always thought it was an urban legend, too.
We should Snopes it.
Well, I'm sure it varies from place to place. I have no doubt such a thing probably has existed. I don't think it exists everywhere, because if it did, somebody would have exploited it by now, and we would have probably seen it. So if you have one of those, let me know. I mean, you don't have to give it to me. But I just like to know that. I would just like somebody to tell me that it's write in and tell us that you have one of those gadgets,
or you've seen it in firsthand.
That you were an EMT and you used to use it. I mean, it's fine, but I mean, the idea of it is very true. And if for St. Patrick's Day you flipped all the stoplights in Boston Green, can you imagine what kind of chaos this would cause? But if that was in conjunction with something else, Election Day, if that was in conjunction with an attack, it was in conjunction with whatever, then it becomes an incredibly powerful and valuable component of those ideas, and suddenly you've got like this really, really big deal that you could destabilize. So this was the old term. So the old terms were these superpowers were out destabilizing third world countries, and it was just sort of a game of counters. This is what the Cold War was all about. It was just like, we have some and you have some, and we're going to do ours and you're going to do yours, and we're going to let them, and we're going to sell them weapons and you're going to sell them the other side weapons, and it's just this big like back and forth mess. And you can then create economic attacks. I mean, imagine you compromise the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, yeah.
And tomorrow at the opening bell, it pops up on the screen and says, LOLs,
You've been pawned.
Yeah, I mean, imagine what that would do to the United States economy if something like that actually did happen, because those kind of attacks and these Stuxnet type of attacks undermine people's faith in their governments. Yeah. It causes chaos. It creates damage.
Well, look what happened with what's his name of Tesla there.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Remember when he was saying that he was securing funding for the private of Tesla, right? The private, and what did he say, $4.20 a share or something like that? And what happened? Well, all hell broke loose, and now he was being investigated. He had to step down, as so on and so forth, and now he's still paying for that. You know what I mean? But all it was a tweet. Yeah. Right? Think about that. A tweet, a simple tweet.
So think about today just how often Donald Trump tweets and what his tweets do, like him or hate him. I mean, but the idea that he tweets something and it changes, it causes financial chaos because he was angry because somebody didn't like him or whatever. Or, his burger didn't have enough pickles on it or whatever it is. I don't know anything about it. I try to not learn anything about Donald Trump. But whatever it is, he tweets about it and it changes. He says, I hate McDonald's today. And then their stock price drops or whatever. Those are really dramatic things that are just being done by individuals. Yeah. I mean, I know he's the president and all, but unfortunately. But, sorry, I'll say it. But I mean, the reality is that... just an individual does it. I mean, one tweet from a celebrity, and all of a sudden all this crazy stuff starts happening, or a CEO, or even just an individual. It's one person, and all of a sudden it becomes news. And I've seen those kind of chains going, too. You've seen those things where it's like Donald Trump tweeted something, Fox News host commented on it, and then Donald Trump comments on what the host said, and it comes back around, and then all of a sudden that host tomorrow is using that as a basis for going forward and saying, this proves it must be true. And you're like, well, no, that's circular logic. Don't do it. Please don't do that stuff. It's crazy. But I think today you're seeing a lot of effort by nation-state governments to just tell us that everything's going to be okay, and which is what they do. I mean, it's all sort of an illusion. I know we have cynical government people, but I mean, the truth is that they're trying to say, well, all this warfare stuff that we don't really understand because I don't actually use a phone. If you saw those hearings where they were, where the people didn't even know how cell phones work, didn't know how Google worked. I remember the hearing with the Congress where the senators were asking.
I do remember.
They were asking Google questions, and the guy's like, he doesn't know the difference in an iPhone and Google and an app on the phone, and like that's the guy making the rules. Now the good news is, so just to reassure you, all those people that their faces, they have this huge staff of people who are the
Hopefully
people that
are
if they're any good, they have a good staff, and their staffers actually know what's going on. That's how Washington really works, is all the staffers, hey, you know who you are out there. All those great staffers that are back there that never get any coverage, that are doing all the research and talking to each other and saying, can you get him to quit saying this, kind of stuff. So there is that kind of thing. And the nation state governments are, I think, trying to get to the point where they can say it's going to be okay. And but it's still scary when you see those hearings and you hear people talking about that. I think warfare changed a lot since 1944. I think if you went out and you started looking at it, I think Skynet could be a reality. I think Metalhead could be very easily a reality, and maybe even the new normal. I mean, why risk soldiers? I mean, soldiers are people. They have families. You see them all the time. You see, oh, this person was injured. This person was killed. Their family now doesn't have their father or their mother or whatever. So if somebody comes along and says, well, this metalhead will replace a soldier, so you don't need a soldier now. I mean, we already done it with drones. So we don't have, you know, I mean, we still have fighter pilots, but we don't have the kind of fighter pilots we had in World War II.
Yeah, now they're virtual. Well,
and we've got a person sitting in a trailer in Utah or Nevada flying a drone that's doing an attack. So when the drone gets shot down, and there's a lot of ethics issues with that. I mean, if you think about it, because it's like, well, does that person now even further disconnected from the napalm? Because that was always the thing about, you know, fighter planes and bombs and things. It was like, okay, if you're flying up there at 40,000 feet and you push a button and all these bombs fall out, it's a real taste of Armageddon, kind of, again, back to Star Trek. And you don't know all the suffering on the ground or whatever, you know, and I don't know. That stuff's really, it's a long way from a bunch of Romans with swords in a big huddle beating each other senseless, where we got into today, where a drone pilot sitting and, you know, goes home, takes a lunch break and then comes back and blows up some more stuff. And I'm not saying that those are bad people or anything. I'm just saying that the idea of it is very far from, you know, two guys with swords whacking on each other in a field somewhere.
Yeah, because there's some level of expectation that each soldier is putting their life on the line, and that, you know, whereas somebody who's operating a drone from a trailer, you know, in whatever, Laughlin.
It's just a video game.
Yeah, it's just a video. And there's no real, but you use the word disconnect, and I like that. I mean, there's no real sort of, but what is the ethics or the implication behind that? You know, you're just playing a video game, and now everything becomes numbers, but there are human lives attached.
I know, and then you're back to a taste of Armageddon. Yeah. Like, why bother? I mean, when it just turns into this remote stuff, two drones going at it over the Gulf of Finland, like, does it really matter anymore? This whole old concept of warfare of, you know, these two people trying to outdo each other, is that really, you know, why not just predict the outcome? Go, well, we've taken the plans for your drone and the plans for your drone, and we've taken the rating of your drone pilot and the rating of this drone pilot, and we each have a playing card.
It's like Call to Arms, or what's that?
Well, I'm thinking more like
those games,
Pokemon with the cards.
Right.
And so I play my card, and I play my
+5 against fire.
Here's my equipment. Here's my pilot, and then you lay your two cards down, and we go, oh, you outscored me, you win. Now you take one of your drones and blow it up, and that's the end of it. Anyway, so we're here in Russia. And if we don't end up, we'll see you next week with a new show live from Rhode Island.
Minus balloons.
Minus balloons, unless we're in the Gulag, in which case we'll try to broadcast live from the Gulag with our hidden cell phones, but you don't want to know where we're having to hide those phones. It could get ugly. But anyway, thanks for joining us live, well, not live, recording live from Russia.
From Russia.
And we will see you next time on Secure Digital Life.
До свидания.
До свидания.